Welcome to the Workhouse Arts Center here in Lorton, Virginia. My name is Kathleen Best Gillmann, and I'm a contemporary realist painter. I work in several media, but my media of choice in the past 6 years has been acrylic paint, and that's what you'll be seeing in this exhibit. This month, as featured artist, I get an opportunity to show you a broader number of my paintings so you can get a fuller sense of the body of my work. And the title of this show is New Horizons, Coastal Paintings. When people are looking at landscapes, they often are curious to know where it is. And when I do my paintings, I do have a particular locale in mind. And the reference photos I took for these paintings, for the most part, were taken in southern Maine and in Minnesota along the north shore of Lake Superior. These paintings I tend to call waterscape paintings because in recent years I've had a real fascination with water. Last spring, when I was showing work at the Truro Festival Art Show, an acquaintance came up to me to ask me about one of my paintings. She wanted to know if indeed the building in the painting called an old hotel might be the former Narragansett Hotel, and indeed it was. And when I do my paintings, I do have a particular locale in mind. For instance, in this painting called Morning's Low Tide at Lord's Point, I took many reference photos when I was at the beach. Working from those photos, one thing that captured my attention were the rocks in the foreground here that tend to lead your eye into the picture plane. And then, because of the houses that suggest human habitation, your eye is naturally drawn to that side of the painting. In Morning's Low Tide, I was fascinated by the quality of light that beautifies and unifies the entire painting. Similarly, in its neighbor, called Ebb Season, I was fascinated by the light. The reference photos that I took for this painting were taken in November, and indeed it was a cloudy day. But as I worked on the painting, it changed a little bit. It seemed to get even cloudier. I considered titling this painting February Flurries, but then I decided it was enough to simply call it Ebb Season to convey that sense of cold on that particular day. I sometimes call my paintings landscape portraits, and that's because I usually am painting a real place. I'm using reference photographs to paint something that looks very much like what you would have seen if you traveled or meandered where I travel and meander. In contrast, I have two paintings here where I diverged from a literal interpretation of what I saw when I took the reference photos. These two paintings are both in a series called North Shore. This is number 8 and this is number 9, and that actually refers to the North Shore of Lake Superior. In both these paintings, I changed the quality of light. That day, a meteorologist would have called it mostly sunny, but when I was choosing to do these paintings, I decided to make the light partly or mostly cloudy. So that was the first thing I changed. And then in this particular painting, called A Superior Day, I also changed the far shore. When I finished painting that far shore, I realized I'd probably been working from some of my mental images because it looked much more like a shoreline that I had seen when I had taken a cruise to Alaska and was cruising on the Inside Passage. Now I'd like to talk about how I come up with some of my titles for my paintings, because I do put a fair amount of thought into titling my paintings. This one in particular is called Out of These Stones. That phrase, out of these stones, has historical and literary roots. The phrase actually comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 3, verse 9. And that's a quote of some of the words of the prophet John the Baptist. I hesitated to entitle this Out of These Stones because in that scene, John is actually rebuking some of his some of the leaders of his people. But in that rebuke, he is actually explaining to them that out of God's power, he could raise up children of Abraham out of these stones. The phrase, out of these stones, could be interpreted in many ways, and I kind of like that fact. I like people to walk up and think about what the title might mean. But I do want to make note that I did take it from the Gospel of Matthew and the words of John the Baptist. Now, across the way, I'm going to talk about another painting which also has a title that I spent considerable time thinking about. The title of this painting is Silent No Longer. And this painting is indeed of a real place. It's at the confluence of the Maryland River and Branch Brook, which is in the Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge in Wells, Maine. Now, you may be familiar with Rachel Carson as a biologist. She wrote a particularly well-known book in the early 1960s entitled Silent Spring. When I was thinking about what to entitle this painting, I started to think about her book and what the title implies. She wrote that book to alert the public to the hazards of chemicals used on crops. In particular, DDT was one of the chemicals that she referred to. Such chemicals are very harmful both to human life and to birds. Thus, she came up with the title, Silent Spring, because if these chemicals continued to be used, the fear was that many birds would die and our springs would be silent. Fortunately, Rachel Carson was something of a prophet in her day, kind of like John the Baptist. People did listen to what she said, and our Congress passed laws banning the use of DDT, rendering our springs silent no longer. The title also refers to the time of day that I chose in this painting. This is a very early morning scene. The light is just beginning to illuminate everything. At this time of day, though the salt marsh looks peaceful, the birds that live there are actually awakening and beginning to make a lot of sound, thus rendering this scene silent no longer. And its neighbor, Salt Marsh Behind Parsons Beach, is number 7 in that series. Silent No Longer is actually number 9 in this series. I started painting this Journey Home series in late 2009 after I had done many paintings in the North Shore series, which we saw earlier. It was a vacation that my husband and I took in the early 2000s, which inspired me so much to think about the coastline of the state of Maine where I grew up. To me, it's kind of ironic that I had to travel to a place I had never seen before I started to think about and began to paint a place I'm very familiar with, which is the southern coast of Maine. Thank you so much for coming to see my exhibit, New Horizons Coastal Paintings. If you'd like to see more of my artwork, it is shown each month at the Loft Gallery in historic Occoquan, which is just about a mile south from the Workhouse Arts Center. My work is also available in the Torpedo Factory in the Bin Gallery inside the Art League in Old Town Alexandria. You will also find examples of my work on the Workhouse website and at my blog, Very Best Fine Art. Finally, I just wanted to let you know I have 2 important shows coming up in early 2012. The first will open the second week of January at Truro Church Art Gallery in Fairfax, Virginia. The opening reception will be Saturday, January 14th from 5 to 7 in the evening, with an artist talk scheduled at 5:30. That show will run through the end of February. The second show I have coming up in 2012 will occur in March. I'll be featured artist at the Loft Gallery in Occoquan, Virginia. The working title for that show is From Aquasic to Occoquan, An Artist's Journey. Please watch for details of these shows on my blog, Very Best Fine Art. Again, thank you so much for spending time with me here in my show.